Aquí estoy otra vez con ustedes. Voy a presentarles lo que yo entiendo que es una de las ponencias más interesantes de este congreso, que tiene una segunda versión. Esta es la versión australiana y pronto veremos mañana la de los japoneses, la de Kimura. Van a intervenir tres personas. Jorge Niland, el carnicero del pescado, un australiano que desde Melbourne acaba de llegar y es un revolucionario en el tratamiento de la maduración de los pescados. Entonces la pregunta es, si los pescados cuanto más frescos están mejor, ¿por qué tenemos que madurarlos? Bien, esa es una de las preguntas que yo les haría a ellos. Les acompaña Dani Garcia y Jorge Martín del equipo de Lobito de Mar, que están siguiendo prácticas similares a la de Jorge Niland en su restaurante en Madrid. Los resultados, yo los he probado, son excelentes. Es otra nueva categoría en la valoración, en las sensaciones que puede producir el pescado. Merece la pena que en un congreso como este tratemos este asunto. Dani Garcia acaba de llevar de Doha. Hoy mismo estaba inaugurando un nuevo vivo en Emiratos. Así que hemos reunido, han hecho miles de kilómetros de distancia por todas partes para poder estar aquí en la ponencia de hoy. Por favor, recibimos con un aplauso Dani García, Jorge Martín y Jorge Niland.
Vale.
Dani, bienvenido. Tú eres el... Bienvenido, buenos días.
Buenos días.
La pregunta que yo me he hecho al auditorio y te hacía y comentaba con él, ¿por qué tenemos que madurar el pescado si siempre hemos pensado que cuanto más fresco está mejor?
Bueno, Soya, buenos días a todos. La verdad que es un placer. Voy a intentar ser breve porque yo creo que lo más interesante es que Joshua cuente absolutamente todos los secretos de la maduración, que nosotros aquí evitamos un poco siempre ese nombre y le llamamos reposo, ¿no? Porque al final nos parecía mucho más interesante y mucho más real hablar de reposo que de maduración, ¿no? Nosotros cuando abrimos Lobito de Mar, el primero, en Marbella, teníamos cierta obsesión por intentar coger pescados grandes, tipo mero, hurtas, pargos, corvinas grandes, lubinas grandes, y madurarlas un poquito, dejarlas sobre todo un poco que reposaran en cámara, ¿no? Eso es lo que hemos escuchado probablemente toda la gente en Andalucía, toda la gente que se dedicaba un poco al mundo del pescado, ¿no? O sea, íbamos ahí a cualquier pescadero, a cualquier restaurante por Zahara y tal, ¿no? Que se ha acostumbrado a coger bichos de ese tipo y preguntábamos, ¿qué hacéis vosotros con esos pescados? No, nosotros los dejamos ahí madurar 7 o 8 días, ¿no? Porque el mero que tanto nos gusta, pero que luego tú coges un mero recién pescado, lo cortas, lo echas a la sartén y aquello se riza, es duro, gustativamente tampoco tiene nada de otro mundo, ¿no? Siempre un poco, para mí, O sea, tenemos un poco esa leyenda de que el mero es absolutamente bestial, pero yo cuando lo cogía y lo cocinaba no me parecía tanto, ¿no? Entonces empezamos a hacer pruebas en Lobito. Hacíamos un poco, mirábamos hacia Japón, envolvíamos en kombu un gran pargo, lo metíamos en la nevera con hielo, evidentemente, y lo dejamos allí una semana, lo sacábamos y aquello nada. No, que hay que quitarle las vísceras. Quitábamos las vísceras y tal, etcétera, etcétera, y absolutamente nada. Hasta que gracias a Instagram, las redes sociales tienen sus cosas muy positivas también, descubrí a John. Y fue un auténtico descubrimiento para mí. O sea, es decir, de pronto había un tío en Australia, ¿no? Que a través de las redes sociales tenía algo que llamaba carnicería de pescados. Y decía, sí, ese tío, me parece súper interesante. Empecé a seguirlo, a buscarlo en internet, etcétera, etcétera. Y curiosamente, ya hablando con Jorge, dijimos, tenemos que ir a ver a ese chico Australia. Claro, era Australia, no es precisamente ahí al lado, ¿no? Pero en uno de nuestros multitud de viajes fuimos a Japón y yo no tenía tiempo, pero dije a Jorge, o sea, pásate por ahí 2 o 3 semanas y que nos enseñen un poco las claves, ¿no? Para hacerlo, porque a nosotros no nos sale ni a la de 1, 2 y 3. Eso es lo que hicimos, escribimos un mail y ellos gentilmente dijeron, sí, claro, venís, oye, mira, somos unos chavales de España y tal y cual, que queremos aprender a hacer eso y eso es lo maravilloso que tiene también la gente y ese mundo a la hora de compartir. Y yo me vine de Japón para acá y Jorge se fue a Australia y se quedó ahí 3 semanas. A la vuelta voy a dar rápidamente varias claves que son para mí fundamentales a la hora de reposar, digamos, el pescado, y que era absolutamente todo lo contrario que nosotros hacíamos. O sea, de pronto, cuando aquí estamos acostumbrados al hielo, a la nevera, al frío, a la cámara, a echarle agua, a limpiarlo una y otra vez, etcétera, etcétera, resulta que lo que más gastaban ellos en kilo allí era papel. O sea, todo se limpiaba con papel y todo se intentaba que no tocara el agua. O sea, al final el agua era o el hilo conductor de la podredumbre del pescado, hacía que se pudriera. Por lo tanto, el agua es lo que se evita primero. O sea, el pescado no tiene que tocar absolutamente nada de agua y tiene que ser una cámara con la mínima humedad posible. Otra parte que a José Carlos le gusta mucho y que a mí me apasiona también, que es la piel, ¿no? O sea,
eso es otro mundo, es fantástico.
Yo le he dicho a él que se trajera un pescado y que lo enseñara aquí delante, cómo se limpia. Pues es muy connotación japonesa, que es quitarle esa primera piel, esa membrana que hace que la escama esté ahí, se la quita con un cuchillo y se cuelga, ¿no? Nosotros a lo mejor a priori siempre con lo que nos gusta la piel de los pescados diríamos, bueno, qué locura, ¿no? Estamos quitándole probablemente lo mejor. Pero es que detrás hay una segunda piel que esa con la maduración y el reposo se va secando poco a poco y que para freír, por ejemplo, vale si la quitas aparte. Para asar también, pero lo más mágico de esa piel es cuando toca plancha. O sea, ya cuando toca plancha y toca acero, o sea, lo que es la plancha en sí se queda tremendamente, decía José Carlos, como un barquillo crujiente, ¿no? O sea, se queda súper fina, más fina que cualquier otra piel. O sea, sin la membrana y sin la escama.
Dani, la pregunta es, ¿de qué color es la piel de un salmonete? Inmediatamente dices roja, ¿no?
Bueno, es blanca, ¿no? Realmente,
pero
¿no?
claro, cuando le quitas las escamas, la membrana adherida a las escamas, aparece la segunda piel que es blanca.
Es blanca, exactamente. Exactamente es blanca. Con salmonete grande también merece la pena. Evidentemente, también aquí hay una cuestión de qué tipo de pescado. Hay pescados que funcionan más, hay pescados que funcionan menos. Siempre pescado grande es mejor, aunque nosotros, que hoy vamos a hacer una cosa rápidamente, Jorge, hemos empezado también a hacer cosas con bogavantes y con langostas porque nos apetecía también, incluso con cigalas. Lo que pasa es que eso, claro, evidentemente, igual que un pescado puede estar, ahora explicará él, pues no sé, 20, 30, 40 días tranquilamente, ese tipo de cosas más, bogavantes, langostas y eso, tiene que estar mucho menos y el tamaño también. Me refiero al salmonete también, se puede, pero el tamaño tiene que ser menor. Lo que pasa es que el salmonete, por ejemplo, yo creo que tiene ya su gracia, ¿no? En fresco, ¿no? No necesita a lo mejor esa búsqueda de esa textura genial y de ese sabor, ¿no? Que produce el umami cuando ha reposado. Pescados grandes me refiero, sobre todo, pescados de 1,5 kilos, 2 kilos para arriba, ¿no? Que yo creo que es lo más interesante.
¿Cuáles son los que maduráis en Lobito? ¿Qué pescados maduráis?
No, son corvina, urta, pargos, meros, pescado un poco de ese tipo. O sea,
¿Tamaño mínimo?
Bueno, desde 1 kilo se puede. De 1 kilo se puede, pero lo ideal, claro, mientras más grande, luego te puede hacer una disección como hace él, que es absolutamente maravillosa, de lo que es todo el pescado. Nosotros, como él también, le quita un poco lo que es la ventresca cuando seca, depende del tamaño del pescado, y lo utilizamos para patés y para otras preparaciones, y todo lo que es la carne de la cabeza. La carne de la cabeza y la ventresca es más fina, más pequeña, y evidentemente no puede madurar tanto como el resto del pescado, o sea, en sí, ¿no? Pero lo más curioso, y que yo estaba con José Carlos cuando entró por primera vez a la cámara de Lobito, que tú entras en Lobito y hay pescados colgados de hace 25 días, y a lo mejor hay 15 o 20 pescados, y no huele absolutamente nada. Pero es que no huele a nada. O sea, ni siquiera pescado, o sea, que no huele a nada. Si tú dejas colgado, húmedo, o en agua, o en cajas, con hielo, cualquier pescado, 15 o 20 días, entra en una cámara y aquello es imposible, ¿no? Y bueno, nuestro sueño ahora básicamente es que, no sé, algún día, ¿por qué no?, uno vaya a la pescadería y se pida un mero de 15 días, ¿no? Oye, quiero 200 gramos de un mero de 15 días, ¿no? Sería genial para todo, porque se gana muchísimo en textura y en sabor. Pero no me quiero extender porque, bueno, Jorge va a hacer ahora el bogavante, que lo va a explicar rápidamente cómo lo hacemos, y sobre todo queremos que él explique absolutamente todo, ¿no?
Bueno, yo lo que voy a hacer es explicar un poquito la técnica de maduración que utilizamos en el bogavante, ¿vale? Hemos intentado seguir un poco la manera que tiene el de curar los pescados, pero no nos funcionaba. Lo hemos intentado de cualquier manera, metiéndolo en sal, no metiéndole, con la piel, sin la piel, de todas maneras. Entonces, al final, la que hemos conseguido, después de muchas pruebas en el taller, es una técnica japonesa que se llama arime konbujime, ¿vale? Que lo que hacemos es hidratar unas hojas de kombu ligeramente en una mezcla de agua y sake al 50% durante unos 20 segundos, y lo que metemos es la cola de bogavante pelada, ¿vale? Esa cola de bogavante la filmamos, ¿vale? La envasamos a un 90% al vacío y la metemos en cámara. Lo máximo que le hemos dejado es 7 días, ¿vale? A partir de 3 ya se va notando pues, que el kombu le va aportando glutamatos, va potenciando el sabor umami, que se nota diferencia, ¿no? Entonces, por ejemplo, es del día 6, ¿vale? Se ve una babilla ya que es del kombu, ¿vale? La típica baba del kombu cuando se hidrata, ¿vale? Y lo que conseguimos es una textura súper melosa, ¿vale? Lo que se produce es una enzimólisis, ¿vale? Las proteínas se cambian a aminoácidos, entonces la textura del bogavante se queda súper melosa. Toda la textura que tiene un bogavante al recién matado se cambia y se queda una melosidad en boca impresionante, ¿vale? Lo que hacemos es ponerle unas especies de pimienta, un poquito de chile, cilantro en polvo, ¿vale? Por todos los lados, ¿vale? Nos gusta mucho especiar las cosas. ¿Vale? Como digo, es una técnica que llevamos tiempo intentando hacerla, pero no hemos conseguido hasta que al final decidimos hacerla como hacen los japoneses con el kombu, ¿vale? Lo que hacemos es cortar unos tacos. Queremos dar protagonismo al bogavante y no manipularlo demasiado, ¿vale? Ponemos en el plato un poquito de soja, un poquito de aceite de oliva, ya que es de nuestra tierra. Y ya está, ¿vale? Y este sería nuestro bogavante madurado por espacio de 7 días. Estamos en pruebas a ver si lo podemos dejar más. Tenemos más, pero hasta la semana que viene no lo probaremos. Veremos a ver. ¿Vale? Y yo creo que ahora hay que dar paso a Josh, ¿vale? Para que enseñe todo el proceso que he inventado.
Cool. My turn.
Okay, Josh.
No, all for you.
Oh, good. Sorry for my lack of Spanish. But it's never a language that I've mastered at all. So thank you for having me. It's been an absolute dream of mine to attend Madrid Fusion. And while I've got the opportunity, I just wanted to acknowledge all the Australians back home that are finding it pretty hard at the moment with all the fires. So it is a great privilege to be here. To discuss dry aging of fish, I think it's a little bit cornered, the conversation. The conversation of aging comes a little bit further down the line. So to begin, chefs, I find myself in a position where we have the power of social media, and we have the opportunity to interact more now than ever on a global scale. We're able to communicate our work more freely. So there's always constant inspiration coming in. But about 4 or 5 years ago, when the idea came that I wanted to open a restaurant with my wife, we just thought to one another, what I'm very good at and what I'm very passionate about is fish. But fish is probably one of the most expensive proteins on the planet, and it keeps getting more and more expensive. And it also requires the most amount of labor to process the fish and cut it correctly. So it's a very expensive business model. It never really made sense. So I pursued it anyway. Call it dumb, but I decided to do it. And the idea was to find the very best fish that we could get our hands on. And we work a lot with fishermen all over the country, from the very far north in Queensland down to Victoria, Tasmania, Western Australia, and we try and bring all of these fish as quickly as we can to my business, which is called Fish Butchery. Fish Butchery opened 18 months after St. Peter opened, and the reason that is St. Peter used to be a sushi train, so it's very tiny. There's 30 seats, and there's not a lot of space. So we outgrew it very quickly, so I needed another space, so we took what used to be a hair salon, and we decided to make it a beautiful fish shop. And so we were able to increase our buying power, which meant we could get better fish. And the idea, when the fish comes in, we go and, like Dani was saying, we cut the scales off the fish instead of using a traditional scaler, or I like to call it a bear trap on a stick, basically, that just rips all the scales off. And now I'm going to pinch your chopping board. Sorry, guys. And by no means is this a new technique. This is a Japanese technique called tsubiki. And the idea is that we cut the scales off the skin of the fish. And forgive me as well, I packed my knives, but Emirates lost my bag. So, using knives.
This one is better.
That should be fine. Perfect. So you can see, this is the scale of the fish. And around the scale is the membrane. And the membrane is what carries the fish's color. So if we see this red snapper, basically by the time I'm finished with it, it will be white, because we've removed all of the membrane and the scale. And the important thing about cutting the scales off, not only does it improve the texture of the fish and keeps the fish very firm, but we're able to cut the scale as well as the moisture off the fish, because moisture in fish is really the enemy. Fish scales are actually porous. They carry very fine, very microscopic holes all over the outside of them, which means if they're dumped into water or ice is packed around the fish directly, moisture enters the flesh of the fish and then starts breaking it down. So you get the point with what I'm doing here. The idea is to get beneath the scale and stay above the skin and remove that very carefully. So, and then you can see in the small stripe I've already done how much it changes straight away. So we can interact now directly with the skin instead of having to get through the scale and the membrane. And also, we don't have scales flying everywhere. We're very controlled in terms of keeping the scale, together. But the idea now is that we wouldn't throw this out. We would boil these scales 3 times to remove the membrane from around the scale, and it softens the texture of the scale. And then we dry them out, and then we deep fry them. And by deep frying them, we make a delicious, crispy snack, I suppose. And it can be seasoned both savory and sweet. We caramelized these scales earlier this year to put onto a dessert that we do at the restaurant. And the dessert was a chocolate and fish fat caramel slice. And we omitted the butter from the caramel, and we replaced it with rendered fish fat that was taken from the stomach of the fish. So to explain further, the whole idea with all of this was born purely out of trying to maximize the amount of yield from a fish. Traditionally, we look at a fish as having a round fish like this one here. You see a round fish having a potential fillet yield of 45%. 45% is obviously less than half. So the perception then is that 55% of the fish is considered waste. So whether or not you're using that waste as stock, or you might use certain parts, maybe the collar and the head to grill, but there is very little desirability seen in the 55. So I always say the head can be split in half and grilled very simply, and it is one of the most delicious things that you can have. But how does that translate to everyone? That might translate to the 2 chefs that come to your restaurant that week, and maybe they'll order it, but maybe they won't, and then it'll end up in staff meal, or it might end up in the bin. The point was that we need to come up with new recipes and new ways to maximize the whole fish. So to consider fish eyes to me are probably one of the most confrontational parts of the fish. This is something that I wouldn't personally want to consume as just this product here. What we did was we blended the fish eye into a puree, and then we put tapioca flour into that puree. We spread it out onto a mat, we steamed it, we dehydrated it, and then we deep fried it, and we had an eye chip, very similar to a Chinese prawn cracker, and we were able to get people at the restaurant consuming fish eyes, which was really exciting for us. Thanks. The other parts of the fish, I suppose, the more confrontational parts, is the fish liver. The liver, to me, for one, it looks like a chicken liver or a duck liver. And so the thinking then is, well, why can't I achieve the same with a fish liver that I can with a meat, like with a chicken or duck liver? So we've gone and we've made pâtés, we've made terrines, we've made an attempt at a torchon in the style of foie gras to have great results. And this is included on a number of our charcuterie plates that we do at the restaurant. This here is the fish's heart. The heart of the fish, is very oxygenated. It's very blood rich. So again, it is a challenging part to make delicious. When it's fresh on day one, we slice it very thinly and we thread it onto a skewer and we grill it over charcoal. And it's very similar in texture to a chicken heart, and a really enjoyable part. And this one here is the spleen of the fish that we take out. Now the spleen, you can do a similar thing where it can be grilled, but if you aren't buying a huge amount of fish at a time and you're only getting 1 or 2 every week, then you can salt down these pieces and then store them under salt. And when you accumulate enough, then you can smoke them, dry them out, and then do a very similar technique to katsuboshi, which is wonderful because it adds so much umami and deliciousness to dishes that otherwise really would have gone in the bin. So this one here, the fish tongue, obviously another tricky part to make really delicious because immediately your brain starts saying, I don't want to eat a fish tongue. But we cook these very gently, like kokocha, like the throat of the fish, which we have here. And all the meat on the outside basically goes jelly. And then we chill it down very quickly. We crumb the tongue, and then we deep fry. And then we eat that like a snack. There's so much to conversate about. It's this one here, another very difficult organ to use. This is the stomach of the fish. The stomach we put into a 5% brine for 7 days. At the end of that time, we wash it completely so that it's purged of all the impurities and there is no acidity inside because there's a lot of enzymes in a fish stomach that break down food. So once the brining's happened, we take it out, we put it into a cryovac bag, we steam the stomach at 85 degrees for 12 hours. And then at the end, we end up with something that's very similar to beef tendon or almost similar to a pig's trotter. It's quite gelatinous, it's very sticky, and it becomes a wonderful vehicle for flavor. And texturally, it's very impressive. To discuss the method of handling for me personally, once we get the fish through the doors, we cut the scales off. We then cut the fish open to take the organs out. Once the organs are out, it's very important that we sift through those organs very quickly so that we can make the most of these fragile items very quickly. So the hearts, the spleen, the fish roe, which we haven't discussed, the fish roe, or for the boy fish, then the milt, the sperm of the fish comes out. And what we do is we process all these soft organs very quickly into, different things. And once the organs are sorted, then the actual fish itself gets wiped down very thoroughly with paper towel. The reason, like I said, is fish is porous, it takes on water. For me, once a fish leaves the water, then you're never to put water back on that fish at any point in time. You're never to put ice directly on the fish. For me personally, I believe that this is what is degrading the fish rapidly. The second a fish interacts with ice or water, we end up with fish that has a time limit on it of 3 to 4 days of potential quality. And so after that point in time, the fish is broken down and it starts to have an odor. To discuss this a little bit more with more detail, a fish, when it swims in the water, it has an organic compound called trimethylamine inside the fish. When a fish dies, the trimethylamine converts into trimethylamine oxide. And upon that breaking down, and through inconsistencies of cold chain management, where we're trying to keep the fish a consistent temperature the whole journey from the point of coming out of the water to going into a pan in your kitchen, we're trying to keep that temperature the same. So through those inconsistencies and through water contact, this trimethylamine oxide converts into ammonia, and ammonia is what we refer to in the West, like in the Western culture, as being fishy fish. We have a number of customers, well, we used to, not so much anymore, but a number of customers that come in and say, what's your least fishy fish? And what they're referring to is a fish that is full of ammonia and starting to break down. It's one of the most offensive aromas, I think, that you can experience, and a huge reason as to why, we don't consume a huge amount of fish, because we're concerned about that smell. So the way that we process the fish then, once we've dry handled it, we put a hook in the tail of the fish, and then I put it into my cool room, which I designed myself, which basically it's called cross-fin technology, and it's basically a refrigeration system very similar to a sushi counter, with the engine, basically, the mechanics of the fridge is in the top. It forces cold air down the glass and then returns it back, and then it works in a cycle like that, instead of having a fan blowing cold air over the fish. So we basically put this system into a very large space, which was extremely challenging because no one had really done it before. And eventually, through trial and error, we managed to develop this refrigeration system, which was incredible. So the fridge itself sits between 0 and -2 degrees. It has no fan at all, and we have rails that run through our cool room where we can hang our fish. The idea of hanging a fish isn't the same as meat dry aging, where you want to break down the connective tissue. There is very little connective tissue to break down in a fish. Once the fish is hanging, we don't want anything touching it. We don't want to wrap the fish. We don't want to have another fish sitting right next to it. We want to have breathing space. To think that the way we handle fish right now is to put a fillet onto a blue cloth, a J cloth or a chucks, depending on what country you're in. But a blue cloth, an absorbent paper goes down, a fillet goes on top, another blue cloth goes on top of that, and then cling wrap goes around that. And this is all as well as the fish being washed. So what you've created is basically an environment for bacteria to grow and develop, and aromas to start, becoming more apparent. So the next time you take the plastic off, you've got a whole lot of ammonia smell. So the idea of hanging a fish is to make sure that air can pass around it, and we can extend the shelf life of a fish. So what we noticed was, through not adding water, through hanging the fish, and through looking after it whilst it was hanging, we noticed that the skin, through the very cold temperatures, started to dry, and we were able to condition the skin as you would a Peking duck or a piece of roast pork, a Chinese roast pork. It doesn't make any sense to put a wet fish into a hot fry pan with fat to get the skin crisp, which is what we've been doing for so long. To dry the skin out purposefully to get a glassy, crunchy, pork-like characteristic is so exciting for me, because it brings a huge amount of desirability to texture and to the crunch everybody craves in the West. It's taking an eyeball and making it crunchy and salty, and tick, that's 2 big ticks for the Western palate. We don't want creamy, stringy, slimy, smelly, all those things. We're trying to make the food really beautiful. So basically, the fish now in the cool room with a dry skin, we can extend the shelf life, which previously has been seen as being 3 to 4 days, to the potential of 1 month, which to me is extremely exciting, because in front of me right now, I'm showing you a traditional fish that had a 45% yield, and now I have 92%. So that is 2 fish for 1, basically. We would think about if the world could start taking 5 fish instead of 10, because we're using all of it. The huge problem that we have right now is a system that exists for fish processing that celebrates quantity over quality. We're looking at a model that pays their fish cutters per fish instead of per hour. So when if a fish can be done very quickly and efficiently, and the more they can do, the more money they get, basically. So this takes a lot of time and care and effort, but now I get the benefit of such a long shelf life. I get the opportunity to work with this fish for a month, for 3 weeks, for 2 weeks, whatever it is, rather than having such a short time. And I get to benefit from every single part of the fish as well. And to me, I've gained a huge amount of inspiration from the meat world. Looking at my business now, which is fish butchery, there was a lot of people who said that was a stupid idea. And I appreciate that, because fish and butchery have never been used in the same sentence before. We're talking about fish mongering. And to me, the word monger basically means to deal and trade in a commodity. So the word butchery is basically to dress and slaughter and prepare an animal in readiness to be sold. So I thought the two of these words could come together in a nice box. And not only are we selling customers a more diverse array of product, we're also giving them something. We're giving them a product that they have more confidence in. If you can go home and you can cook very similarly to my skill set or the skills of my chefs or the skills of the chefs around us, then you'll want to consume that fish again. So, yeah, it's a very broad topic, and to me, the biggest issue I feel is the use of water with fish, which I feel brings a lot of people on two sides. How is it that we've done something for so long, and why hasn't this been discussed before, and why should we fix something that's not broken? And what I'm saying is the system is broken, and the reason why we have these issues globally of overfishing and wastage is through really poor handling and not understanding the logic behind fish, and that is to just be more careful. Because if you think about it, has any of you been to a meat butchery and you've seen a butcher cutting a side of a beast, whether it's a sirloin coming off a cow? Would you ever see somebody cutting a sirloin off, it comes off the bone, that meat then gets dipped in water, then put back on the board, the steak gets cut, dipped in water, and then it's then put on ice to be sold? No one, I hope, no one would have ever seen that before, because meat is held in such reverence, and there would be never a time where we would see meat being washed with a hose to make it look more glamorous or more shiny. So my point is, maybe if we were washing our meat, then we'd have something called beefy beef or lamby lamb. And it sounds silly, but these things, these bacteria, these aromas, these odors are derived from incorrect temperatures and the use of water. So that's it. Yeah, no. I would obviously love the opportunity to cook for you and show you, the different methods of cookery for all of these different cuts, and to actually, show you the nuts and bolts of it. But for me personally, I really wanted to come to Madrid Fusion and show you the potential of a fish now in 2020. To me, it's just careless that we continue to throw half the fish in the bin when there is so much creativity that can be expressed with a fish. And I'm very proud that somebody like Dani and Jorge can interpret the work that we started in Sydney and then showcase it in their restaurants here in Spain. And writing a book, the Whole Fish Cookbook, I really wanted to express my work to show the world and inspire the world to look at fish very differently. Whether that's putting something different on the menu, or whether commercial fishermen can start looking at this work, and even if they take 10%, they'll notice a huge difference in their product, in their quality, and also into the financial side of things, because every single piece on this table has a monetary value. Everything costs money. And for a small business like mine, if I'm throwing half of a fish in the bin that may cost $250, I've got $125 left of that fish to make money on. And if I can take that back to $200 worth of fish that I've got to make money on, then my business stays open for another year. So it's logical, and it's taken a lot of my work has been inspired by the meat world, basically, because you think of a pig and going to the hills of Naples and seeing a family slaughter a pig and take it back to their home, and you would never see them taking the loins off the back of the pig and then throwing the rest in the bin. That's the kind of absurdity that we're looking at with fish at the moment. We're looking at such a small thing. So you look at the meat, the soft organs come out first, they get processed, then the legs come off to make ham. The next year, the sausages get made, the primal cuts get eaten, and there's a wonderful cycle of food being consumed and nothing going in the bin. So I hope all of you can take away a very small amount from my conversation, and whether it's having greater conversation with the people who are selling your fish, or whether it's, you know, the chefs in the audience or even backstage that can demand, you know, better quality and to ultimately get a better product on the plate, and to hopefully see us consuming fish in the future, because that's what's most important. So thank you. Thank you. Cool. Perfecto.
No sé si alguien le quiere preguntar, ¿no?
Eso quería decir, que si queríais vosotros interactuar en algún momento con él, o si alguien del público quiere también.
Yo creo que la gente, ¿no? Mejor si quiere preguntar algo.
Pero, Dani, tú que estás madurando los pescados, reposando los pescados, ¿cómo acepta el cliente? ¿Los tienes en Lobito de mar?
De hecho, el nombre reposado viene realmente por un poco traspasar esa barrera del miedo, ¿no? Yo creo que también, evidentemente, somos un país que es bastante difícil de explicar. O sea, ya pasa con la carne, que se supone que es más natural, entre comillas, y ya siempre hay mucho debate en torno, ¿no?, a la cantidad de días que debe o no debe estar la carne. Si nos imaginamos que somos un país de pescado, yo que nací en Marbella, que no deja de ser un pueblo pesquero, contando eso, la verdad que es complejo, ¿no? O sea, y yo creo que todavía hay cierto miedo y desconocimiento, pero eso es como todo en la vida, ¿no? O sea, es como la primera espuma y el primer sifón, y es una cuestión de tiempo, y que verdaderamente se siga haciendo, y se sigue haciendo con consistencia, porque como él ha dicho también, es que todos son ventajas, aparte del aprovechamiento evidente. Pero claro, tú compras una hurta en un restaurante, muchos de aquí tenemos restaurante, y al final también eso es una grandísima ventaja, el hecho de que puede estar entre 10 y 20 días tranquilamente, según el tamaño, ¿no? Eso antes era impensable, ¿no? O sea, eso es también algo que a nivel de restaurante es súper positivo, aparte de la evidente textura y sabor que gana, ¿no?
Bueno, pero no todo el mundo lo puede hacer, porque se necesitan unas cámaras de frío por gravedad, frío seco absoluto, ¿no?
Sí, a ver, pero bueno, o sea, que eso se puede, que no es algo, ¿no? A nosotros no nos ha costado tampoco nada de otro mundo. También es habilitar una cámara para eso, simplemente.
Adaptarla.
No tiene, él la tiene mucho más profesionalizada. O sea, lo que él tiene allí es una auténtica
Y él
pasada.
solo mete pescado, y nosotros, pues, no tenemos esa facilidad y tenemos que meter marisco también. Pero él solo mete pescado. Entonces, claro, él genera mucho menos humedad que nosotros. Nosotros metemos cosas con hielo, generamos un poquito de humedad, y a lo mejor nos cuesta un poquito más. Lo hemos conseguido.
¿Qué humedad tenemos nosotros? ¿30%?
Humedad, no, un poquito más. Un 50, 45, 50 más o menos.
¿Y tú qué humedad tienes más o menos en tus cámaras? Yo
75%.
75?
Yes. Oh, 70.
No,
I'm sorry. It's 70% in our cool room at Fish Butchery, in the new one. Yeah. So.
O sea, la humedad es, como él también ha comentado un poco, ¿no? O sea, es la bacteria, la humedad, el agua, todo eso es lo que crea el peligro, que es lo contrario. Ten en cuenta que cuando nosotros pusimos primer Lobito, pusimos un depósito de agua de mar, porque pensábamos que se pueden hacer millones de cosas con agua de mar, pero lo que queríamos era tener siempre limpiar los pescados con agua de mar, y no sé, ¿no? Siempre hemos tenido un poco esa sensación. Yo creo que es evidente que romper esa barrera sobre todo en un país como el nuestro, no es fácil, pero no vamos a dejar de hacerlo por no... O sea, poco a poco la gente irá entrando, irá comprendiendo. Eso de hoy probablemente sea un paso más, ¿sabes? Todo suma.
Tú has dicho que toda la limpieza la hacéis con papeles.
Sí, yo he dicho que lo que más se gasta son kilos de papel, ¿no?
El agua,
a lot of paper in your...
el agua es lo peor.
No, I said that you are clean with papers always.
Yes, yeah.
A lot of papers you buy.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a double-edged sword. You look at, the paper that we use and compared to the water and things. But yes, we use a lot of paper towel to wipe the fish out, and that's the best way that we've found to make sure that the fish is very clean. If we leave any sediment or impurities on the bone within the fish, then they're the first to oxidize and start to give aromas. Even when we are handling it correctly, it's important to get all that blood out. And to the point where we actually use toothbrushes to scrub the bone free of all the blood. So.
Es un trabajo súper artesano de papel, de limpiarle toda la sangre y dejarlo sin agua. Yo quería también un poco explicar que, por ejemplo, la diferencia de lo que él hace a lo que se hace en Japón, ¿no? Que en Japón normalmente se cura siempre lo que son ya los lomos.
Lomos limpios envueltos en papel.
Solo y exclusivamente el lomo. Yo la primera vez que he visto hacer pescado entero, evidentemente, ha sido a él, ¿no? Y bueno, y el mundo atún, ojo, también, que hay mucho, lo que pasa que es verdad que el mundo atún no te permite un poco te permite mucho más hacerlo más tipo japonés, donde es mejor hacerlo por piezas más pequeñas y curarlo en un papel y listo, ¿no? Pero la primera vez en la vida que vimos pescado grande curado fue a él.
Las recetas que he probado tuyas eran en lobito a la plancha, pero ¿estos pescados reposados admiten cocina?
Bueno, admiten, el crudo es brutal.
El crudo buenísimo.
El crudo es brutal, porque además el crudo, yo creo que siempre, cada vez que ahora vas muchas veces a algún restaurante, aunque sea japonés, y ves el corte y ves que hay humedad y que el pescado es como más, ya dices, o sea, ¿no? Le falta, ¿no? Algún día más de cámara y le falta un poco, pero se puede hacer absolutamente de todo. O sea, al final no deja de ser un pescado. O sea, aquí lo único que entra en juego, digamos, la diferencia es la piel, ¿no? O sea, que la piel, por ejemplo, para que tenga más sentido, o sea, tiene que ser, como decíamos, ¿no? Tocar cromo y que sea súper crocante entera. A lo mejor para freír la piel tienes que hacer lo que él hace, ¿no? Que es sacarle un poco lo que es la parte ya de la membrana y las camas, secarla y freírla como un snack, ¿no?
I was just going to say one thing I forgot to mention. The whole reason for wanting to mature a fish, and obviously we're trying to do it as a business decision that we can maximize our possible time frame that we've got to use the fish. But there are some fish which behave better, obviously. You can't age everything. I don't have little sardines pegged all over the cool room trying to age those fish. Some fish are better than others. If you look at the composition of a fish, then every line within a fish fillet, basically, that you can see, all those little lines, they all represent one muscle of the fish. And this is through observation. This is something that I've kind of seen and what I've thought of is the closer those lines are together, the closer the muscles are together, the more dense and more fatty and more oily the fish is, which means then that I can store it for a longer time. The further they are spread apart, and probably in this case of this fish, the further they're spread apart, then the shorter time that I would be maturing the fish. Usually fish that have greater space between the muscles carry more moisture, and I like to refer to it as like making an emulsion. Like if you're making a mayonnaise and you have eggs in a bowl and you're whisking and you're adding oil and you keep whisking and you get to a point where it's perfect and it's nice and thick. If you then continue to add oil and keep adding, eventually it splits and it breaks. It's the same thing for fish aging. What I'm trying to do is find a sweet spot where the fish tastes better, or more, it articulates the flavor of a fish more than it was. There is around 75 to 80% moisture in fish similar to this. In fish more like tuna and mackerel and things that are more dense and more oily, it's closer to 70%. So we can mature those tunas for up to a month, 2 months, without the use of any salt. If we're looking at a fish like this, I would see potentially 10 to 12 days a beneficial time that we could mature it for. And that maturation time basically increases, well, it activates all the glutamates within the actual fish itself, which means then we're making it more savory and more delicious. So you might come to my restaurant and see us cook a fish very simply and only put that on the plate. But then to me, that's one of the purest and best ways to eat, because then you can actually understand what the flavor of a fish tastes like, which I feel not a lot of us know how to articulate the flavor of a fish. A lot of times we explain fish as flaky or soft or sweet, or, you know, usually it's denoting kind of conversation more around how it feels in your mouth, as opposed to it tastes like fennel, it tastes like lemon. Through aging, we can discover that fish actually do have significantly detailed flavor profiles. We have a kingfish back home that we age for 20 days, and at that time then we start tasting lemon juice. It's almost as if the fish has been seasoned with lemon already without us adding anything to it. And we can eat it raw. We can eat it raw. It's, you know, a wonderful thing. But obviously, with all of these things, with soft organs, offal, fish that is aged beyond, you know, the reality of what we think, we have to be very careful. It's very hygienic, the conditions that we work in, and we have to maintain a very cold temperature. So, yeah.
¿Alguien quiere hacer una pregunta? Pues yo desde aquí no veo bien. Ahí en la primera fila, por favor, el micrófono.
Todavía no he probado sus platos, pero yo quería saber si la textura final es cremosa, es decir, en contraposición con el haddock, con la mojama. What's the texture of your dishes?
Yeah. So there's quite a few people that get misguided in terms of what the fish tastes like, because when the word dry aged gets used, sometimes it gets confused into thinking that we're making mohama, for example, and the texture changes to the point of dryness or chewiness. And what I'm trying to do with the method that I've developed is to maintain day one quality for an extended period of time. And by doing that, then we've noticed that the fish texturally becomes far better and firmer in more concentrate. I'm not sure if you've seen my book, but I've done a side-by-side photo of two tunas, one that's day 2 and one that's day 22. And you can notice how different they are. And it's about bringing density to the fish, which fills your mouth more, and removing, to me, what is the unnecessary moisture within fish. And it's all about just articulating it more. But it's to make sure that you get a juicy, you know, succulent piece of fish. It's not to dry it out or make it soft. It's about trying to give you, like, we have people come to the restaurant, they eat a 30-day aged piece of tuna and then come to me and say, that was the freshest, most delicious piece of fish I've ever had in my life. And it's a month old. But to me, it's, if the perception of deliciousness is freshness, then fine. But it's all about trying to find a moment where a fish tastes better. And by doing this, then we can actually bring value to these lesser celebrated species of fish. Because globally, we're only consuming probably 15 to 20 species on repeat. Everybody's doing snapper, everybody's doing salmon, the turbots. Everybody is very specific about certain species when there's a plethora of other species that we should be consuming to alleviate some of the stress that we're placing on the main species. So by making them more delicious, by having a plan for the whole fish as opposed to just the fillets, then we'll be in better shape, I feel. So, yeah.
Bueno, pues llega el momento de terminar.
Do you know?
No, how big?
No matter the size.
¿Qué quieres saber? ¿El tamaño de...?
El tamaño da igual, se puede hacer con cualquier tamaño.
Kilo y medio para arriba.
O sea, una sardina no.
The size that you can
Yeah,
age?
the size that
or-
you can, yeah, dry age.
Okay, yeah, so for me...
The size of the bee. Of
Yeah,
the
like-
fish, you know.
A lot of people ask me this as well because they think it's only for big fish, and so how can you do it? The plate-sized fish, basically, like small fish, maybe starting at 800 to 900 grams, would be about as small as you can start. Because fish smaller than that carry very little moisture, and you would end up with too dry. But then it may be that the smaller fish might need 1 or 2 days. But then as you get bigger, then the opportunity to go longer is there. But, you know, there is fish on my menu that we try to get it from the fishermen and get it on the menu straight away. So, yeah.
Bueno, tenemos que terminar casi un poco por responder a tu inicial pregunta. La técnica de Niland, yo creo que concentra el sabor y produce unos resultados, cambia la textura. La técnica japonesa que veremos mañana de Kimura-san como que suaviza la textura del pescado. Los japoneses se envuelven en papel y he tomado pescados con 60 y 90 días. Y en sashimi crudos están fantásticos, como decía Dani. Bueno, son dos técnicas a considerar diferentes. Muchísimas gracias a Niland por haber venido y estar aquí. Muchísimas gracias a Dani Garcia y a Jorge Martín por habernos acompañado y enhorabuena a ambos por la ponencia que ha sido excepcional. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Cool.
Sí.